Some humans believe that unaliving several of their romantic partners and replacing them with new ones is easier than breakups. Watch till the end and you will find out how many love interests were disposed of and how long the crimes were kept hidden. This is a wake-up call to all those who believe that it can't happen to them. 1954 in the country of Canada, Camille Saru was born. No information was provided on his youth or family dynamic, but Camille was recently divorced and found himself lonely for new companionship. In 1987, he met a woman by the name of Liz Roy, who was also divorced and had a teenage daughter from her previous marriage. They dated each other exclusively and couldn't get enough of one another. The lovebirds had so many things in common with each other, it was easy for them to fall in love fast and hard. Camille eventually proposed marriage and was willing to be a father to her child. She accepted, and they would soon have a son of their own together. For years, Camille and Liz seemingly lived a happy life together until Liz found out that Camille had been molesting his stepdaughter. Liz was obviously furious, and the two of them had an argument which turned into a fight. To prevent the kids from listening, the fight spilled into the rear yard of their home, which was surrounded by a high wooden privacy fence that was meant to obstruct the view of their neighbors. Liz was relentless and demanded answers. Camille, who had initially started out with denial, became angry at Liz for not accepting his explanation. Unexpectedly, Camille, out of frustration and anger, instinctively picked up a huge rock and struck her about the head several times, causing her brain to protrude from her skull, unaliving her. Now faced with the possibility of being arrested and held accountable, Camille decided that he needed to hide Liz's body. Under cover of darkness, he then dragged Liz's body as covertly as possible back into their house. Camille created a mental list of ways to dispose of his wife's body, but then chose to dismember her into small pieces. He then placed the small parts in separate trash bags, realizing that he now had to discard these bags. So he came up with the idea to carry them individually to the local park, which was down the street from his home. He was spotted suspiciously carrying the bags down the street by one of his neighbors. Now spooked that he would be discovered, he retrieved the bags and buried them in his own rear yard. In an attempt to form an alibi, Camille then went to the police department and filed an assault report against his wife, stating that she attacked him and then fled by train to avoid being arrested. Police believed his story without verifying anything and just charged his missing unalived wife with the assault. Liz was never seen alive again. Here is an even worse part of the story. His unalived wife's daughter became the sole responsibility of Camille, so he began to assault her regularly, forcing himself upon her. Eventually, tired of the abuse, the stepdaughter notified the authorities by herself, and an investigation was ensued. He was eventually arrested, found guilty, and did prison time for the assaults. After Camille's release from prison in 1992, he met a woman by the name of Jean who had a strained relationship with her family. Camille and Jean would fight regularly and then split. After some time passed, they would get back together and the cycle would repeat. This was until 2003, when Jean had decided to permanently end their relationship. Angry about this, Camille decided to end their relationship on a good note by inviting her to a romantic date that she would never forget. Camille asked Jean to come with him for a romantic walk in the woods. During that walk, Camille picked up a rock and bashed her head, unaliving her. He then buried her in that same park. For an alibi, Camille was able to acquire several forged letters in Jean's name stating that Jean left Camille for another man. This worked for nearly a year until Camille became nervous that he heard construction was taking place in that nearby park where he buried his ex. Camille snuck into the woods late one night and removed the body from the grave. He then tossed it in the local river. In the year 2012, Camille moved to a high-rise building in a different city, and he brought his unaliving skills with him. A 64-year-old neighbor by the name of Paula resided in a much larger and nicer apartment than Camille's. Camille became jealous and wanted her apartment for himself. Camille invited Paul to come with him for a walk in the woods. When they arrived, he stabbed her with a knife and then bludgeoned her with a stone until she was unalive. Afterwards, He stole her apartment keys and buried the body in the shallow grave. Camille returned to Paula's apartment and began to throw Paula's personal belongings into the building's dumpster before moving himself in. A neighbor spotted Camille and asked what he was doing in Paula's apartment. He responded that Paula hit the lottery and went on vacation and didn't want any of her belongings. After days of trying to contact his mother by phone, Paula's son came looking for his mother but only found Camille living in Paula's apartment. Pissed and worried about his mother, he went looking for her. Andre notified the police and Camille was brought into the police station for an investigation. After a 2-hour interview, Camille confessed to unaliving Paula. The police then considered the disappearances of his past 2 wives as suspicious. After an inspection was done of his previous home, Liz's body was located buried in the rear garden. When this evidence was produced to Camille, he confessed to the homicide of both of his wives and Paula. In 2011, Camille was charged, found guilty, and sentenced to life imprisonment.